I've been playing a lot of Assassin's Creed Origins recently, and I've really been enjoying its setting in ancient Egypt. But it's dawned on me, when it comes to the historical substance, Ubisoft have created a game of sharp contrasts. While the game world is absolutely stunning, meticulously detailed, the best recreation of ancient Egypt ever, I would say, the historical characters that populate that world are almost the exact opposite. Overly simplified, cliched, at times just plain wrong, and, well, flat. And considering it features historical A-listers such as Cleopatra and Julius Caesar, it's compounded my frustration. But hang on a minute, I hear you cry. This is a video game. You can parkour up the Great Pyramid, scale the Lighthouse of Alexandria, or flip your chariot around like a tiddlywink. It's not exactly historical realism. Well, I hear you, but when you have a game world that's so good it actually predicted an archaeological discovery at the Great Pyramid, yep, I'm not making it up, it really did, you'd think the historical characters might have fared a little better. So, grab a cup of tea, let's delve deeper, and I'll tell you why I think, when it comes to the celebrities of the ancient world, Ubisoft deserve an F- for this one. First, let's get to grips with the history. Origins is set right at the end of ancient Egyptian history during the Ptolemaic period. You can see more about the setting in this other video I've made. Nudge nudge, wink wink. The game starts in 49 BC, just as Ptolemy XIII has booted his sister and former co-ruler Cleopatra off the throne and taken power for himself, starting a civil war. Cleopatra was exiled and tried to raise an army of her own in the south, hoping to return and take back the throne. At the same time, the much more powerful Roman Empire, in fact Egypt at this point was a client kingdom of Rome, was also having a civil war. Julius Caesar was having an epic fight with Pompey Magnus over who would control the Roman Republic, the world's superpower. Both Cleopatra and Ptolemy understood that being allied with the right Roman was the quickest way to oust their sibling and get the throne back for themselves. And so Ptolemy, seeing that Caesar was winning the war, had the bright idea of murdering Pompey, chopping his head off, and offering it to Caesar as a gift to try and get in his good books. The plan backfired. When Caesar arrived in Egypt, he was horrified and appalled when the head was presented to him. Pompey had been his former ally and friend. Caesar used Headgate as an excuse to land his army of 4,000 men in Alexandria. When he took up residence in the royal palace, Cleopatra ingeniously saw an opportunity and had herself smuggled into the palace where she met with him. The two agreed to cooperate. Cleopatra had a powerful ally that could restore her to her throne, and Caesar had a capable ruler for Egypt that, for one thing, could ensure the valuable grain supply back to Rome. Unfortunately for them, their enemies were still at large and besieged them in Alexandria for 6 months. Eventually, Caesar's pal, King Mithridates, turned up with a force of 18,000 men, and Caesar, commanding this new army, defeated Ptolemy XIII at the Battle of the Nile. Ptolemy drowned whilst attempting to retreat. A peace deal was struck, Cleopatra got her throne back, and her and Caesar went on a holiday cruise up the Nile. Nice one. 9 months after first meeting, Caesar and Cleopatra had a son who they called Caesarion. Unfortunately for Caesar, when he returned to Rome, he was assassinated by his fellow senators who viewed him as a direct threat to their grip on power. Cleopatra was in Rome with Caesarion at the time, and that's about where the game ends. But to finish the background, she took one look at the unfolding political situation in Rome and thought, well, this has gone tits up. So she returned to Alexandria to see how things would pan out in the long run. Years later, she would side with and marry Mark Antony, who had become ruler of the eastern half of Rome, fighting in another Roman civil war against Octavian, ruler of the western half. Octavian eventually won, and Mark Antony and Cleopatra committed suicide. So, like any good thriller movie, you'll notice that almost all of the main protagonists at this point are dead. Anyway, Octavian changed his name to Augustus and became the first Roman emperor, ruling the Roman Empire for 40 years. So that's the background, and that's how these titanic historical figures interacted with each other during a pivotal time in world history. Their actions would shape the world for centuries to come. So let's see how Ubisoft decided to handle them, shall we? As it's Cleopatra we meet first, let's start with her. During the mission Egypt's Magi, Bayek eventually comes face to face with her at Apollodorus' villa, where she's in the middle of a lavish party. The first thing to say about the real Cleopatra is that almost everything written about her was penned years after she died, which should ring a massive alarm bell. There was a ferocious propaganda war launched by her enemy Octavian, a master of the dark arts, both during her life and after she died. It painted her as a promiscuous, man-eating seductress, And with this, Octavian was also targeting Mark Antony, insinuating that he was in thrall to a seductive foreign queen and therefore unfit to rule Rome. But we also know from the historical records that she was witty and charming, very intelligent, the ultimate conversationalist. She spoke 9 languages and was the only one of her dynasty to bother learning Egyptian. The rest just spoke their native Greek. The point I'm trying to make, and not to sound cliched myself, but it was her magnetic personality, you could say, that was her real attractiveness according to the historical records. And it's not that Cleopatra didn't use her sexuality to win the favour of Caesar and later Mark Antony, she surely did. But she didn't just go around flaunting it, she used it in a targeted way, to her advantage. Many classicists think she probably only slept with 2 men, i.e. these 2, her entire life. So how did Ubisoft decide to introduce her character? Surely they didn't fall for all that Octavian stuff about her being a sex-crazed seductress.
I will sleep with anyone, as long as they agree to be executed in the morning.
Maybe they did.
Like Xantivis.
He was well satisfied with his bargain. Who is this toothsome fellow?
Oh, looks like she's trying it on with Bayek now. Good work, Octavian. You're practically ghostwriting this scene. Well, I suppose it's easier to model a sexy woman in a skimpy outfit than to actually bother writing a nuanced character grounded in history. And what's she doing having a house party at this point anyway? She's supposed to be raising an army to fight her brother, exiled in southern Egypt, not playing beer pong on the outskirts of Alexandria. Call me harsh, but Cleopatra's character in this game struck me as being about as deep as a puddle. A lot of her pretty one-dimensional dialogue covered up in a sort of sexy, vocal-fried English accent.
I'm worried that my quarters are not as comfortable as your palace.
Comforts. We despise them.
Oh, the wit. How does she do it? Watch out, Oscar Wilde. You might not be born for another 2,000 years, but you've got some competition here. Anyway, enough of my overly sarcastic reaction. Back to the history. What about the elephant in the room? What did Cleopatra actually look like?
Great lady. Your audacity is equaled only by your beauty.
Well, Caesar's sold. But did the real Cleopatra look like this? Short answer, and this will surprise no one, almost certainly not. By comparison, both Pompey Magnus and Julius Caesar seem to have been fairly closely modelled on their sculptures, apart from Caesar's hair implants. Now here's a bust believed to be Cleopatra. Not exactly a dead ringer. To be fair, scholars aren't certain what she looked like because of a lack of definitive evidence, but many believe she had a large nose and a prominent jaw. She might even have been a redhead. And to finish, the last time we see her is in Rome, just after Caesar's assassination. She's with Caesarion, who would have been about 2.5 at this point. I mean, what are they feeding him? Growth hormones?
Listen to the cries in the streets. They call you a dead tyrant's whore.
I am still your queen.
But Caesar was hugely popular with the people of Rome. More on that later. And again, she wouldn't have been called anything at this stage, not until Octavian gets stuck in with his propaganda years later. The second ancient historical celebrity we come across is Pompey Magnus, who was a well-respected senator and general of the Roman Republic. We don't see him much in-game, but early on, Aya is sent to convince him to join with Cleopatra in the Ptolemy civil war.
An alliance with Cleopatra is a union of true power. She wants more than an ally. She seeks a king.
A valuable friendship indeed. Agreed. My fleet will soon be ready for Egypt.
There's no historical evidence for either a meeting or an alliance with Cleopatra's side, and for good reason. At this point, Pompey was stuck fighting a civil war across the Mediterranean with Caesar. He couldn't afford to send troops to Egypt to sort out a dynastic dispute between 2 teenagers. I'd say not even this lovely bribe, or the offer of Cleopatra's hand in marriage, would have convinced him. Egypt was heavily indebted to Rome at this point anyway. This chest full of treasure is probably just a month's repayment on the interest. The last time we come across Pompey is later in the game. Cleopatra, fearful that her alliance with him is in danger, orders Bayek and Aya to race to meet him as he's landing in Egypt.
We head to meet Pompey. My last resort.
Whoops. But this doesn't make any sense either, because 9 weeks prior to this, on the 9th of August 48 BC, Pompey was decisively beaten by Caesar at the Battle of Pharsalus, effectively destroying him. The reason he was arriving in Egypt at all was because he was fleeing, hoping to find refuge.
No. No, it can't be.
It makes no sense that Cleopatra would still be bothered with an alliance with someone who had been for over 2 months a spent force. On a side note, Pompey in the game is killed by Lucius Septimius, which is fairly accurate. Septimius, along with accomplices Achillas and Savius, stabbed him to death while he was coming ashore in a boat and cut his head off a day before his 58th birthday. Which reminds me, this guy's supposed to be 57. I must get the number of his plastic surgeon. Anyway, the real assassins dumped his body in the sea rather than propping it up on a stake like this. Okay, now on to Caesar. The first we see of him in-game is when he's presented the head of Pompey by Ptolemy XIII, practically at the same moment that Cleopatra enters the room hidden in a carpet. Now I realise for brevity's sake this is an amalgamation of historical events, fine, but they've glossed over a few important details. When Caesar was presented the head of Pompey in real life, he was appalled, furious. He apparently wept when he was given his signet ring. The reason why Caesar reacted so badly was that he and Pompey had once been friends. Prior to the Civil War, they had ruled Rome together for 7 years, along with Marcus Crassus, as the first triumvirate, and the idea of a client kingdom like Ptolemaic Egypt killing a Roman citizen would also have enraged him, especially as it denied him the opportunity to use Pompey's surrender to him personally as a propaganda tool to boost his popularity back in Rome. So, you'd think he'd be pretty annoyed. But Ubisoft Caesar?
Pompey was your enemy, Caesar.
He was my friend first. But you are right, Ptolemy. Now let us discuss our alliance.
Nah, he's not really that bothered. But the whole reason why Caesar was in Egypt is to chase down Pompey, not to discuss an alliance with a militarily weak client kingdom ruled by a 13-year-old boy. And this was a big deal. Murdering Pompey was a serious mistake by Ptolemy, and it may well have influenced Caesar in choosing to side with his sister rather than him. And is it just me, or is Julius Caesar in this game a bit, well, just disappointing? This is one of the biggest figures and most influential people in history. For someone who was a ruthless egomaniac and strategic genius, who always had some kind of plan up his sleeve, he seems to be winging it an awful lot in this game. What's he doing in the front line of battle? He's 53! Anyway, possibly his most famous quote,
Die is cast!
appears here during the siege of Alexandria. In reality, this is what he is supposed to have said when he crossed the Rubicon River in North Italy and marched on Rome, starting the Roman Civil War 2 years before this in 49 BC. But the worst offence Origen commits is in handling his assassination. I can get over the fact that you play as Aya, even though you spent virtually the entire game as Bayek, but what really twists my melon is this, said by Brutus, who's arguing against Caesar right before the stabbing starts.
We want a Rome that offers justice, peace, and land to all its citizens, not just the privileged few.
But this is the exact opposite of what was really going on. In Rome at this time, huge farming plantations called latifundia were driving small landholders and farmers off their land. They took over swathes of the countryside, ousted the locals, and filled them with slaves to do all of the work. Commoners fled to the city, leading to unemployment and overpopulation. The latifundia were making a killing and had bought a lot of the senators in the Senate. Nothing changes in politics, does it? Anyway, Caesar wanted to bring in land reform, buying unused land from latifundia and turning it over to Roman citizens, military veterans, and freed men. Land for the people was Caesar's view. Brutus and his whole faction in the Senate were totally opposed to it. Caesar was the one who was popular with the people, not the Senate. They were just trying to keep the status quo. And yes, Caesar was also becoming a dictator, but it wasn't as simple as saying that one side was good and the other one was bad. The history is far more nuanced than that. Usually on this channel, I try to celebrate and champion history in video games, exploring what inspires and influences developers in bringing back to life scenes and events from our past. But while Assassin's Creed Origins game world left me picking my jaw up off the ground, the depiction of these guys left me shaking my head in disbelief and frustration. So I think it's only fair for balance sake that I've spent the entire video ranting about what irked me so much. To summarise, it seems to me that Origins has shot itself in the foot, or maybe I should say stabbed itself in the back, with wanting to merge geopolitically complicated history with the story it wants to tell of bad proto-Templars versus good proto-assassins. It forces historical characters into one of two wildly oversimplified categories, pitching the unambiguously bad Caesar against the unambiguously good Senate. I don't know why they couldn't just use the events from 49 to 44 BC that the game covers as an interesting, immersive background, rather than ham-fistedly trying to incorporate it into the series' lore. In my opinion, the biggest assassination of all in Origins is Ubisoft's character assassinations of some of the most famous people in history.